As the days passed, Emily's life in Clearwater settled into a routine. She found comfort in the quiet pace of the town, away from the chaos and high expectations of the opera world. The job at the high school was everything she needed, a fresh start, a place where no one knew her past. She spent her days answering phones and directing students to the right classrooms. But all the while, her heart ached for the music she'd left behind. Every now and then, she would find herself wandering through the school's music hall, the echoes of piano scales and voice exercises tugging at her soul. On one of these days, she found herself standing outside the door to the music room, her hand resting lightly on the frame as she listened to the students rehearse. The melody of a soprano voice filled the air, and she couldn't help but close her eyes for a moment, letting the familiar sound transport her back to the grand stages of Europe where she had once performed. The memory was bittersweet. Emily had been at the top of her career, admired by critics, adored by audiences, and yet she had walked away from it all. The pressures, the expectations, the endless performances, it had all become too much for her, and so she had left. Mr. Thompson, ever the enthusiast for finding talent, was the first to notice her standing by the door. His gaze locked on her, and a smile spread across his face. He had seen her several times over the past few weeks, always quiet and unassuming, but there was something about her that intrigued him. He saw the way her eyes lit up when she heard the music. "You know," he said, walking up to her, "we're always looking for more voices around here. You seem like you'd be a great fit for the choir. Why don't you give it a shot?" Emily shook her head gently, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "I'm afraid I'm not interested in singing publicly anymore." Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more to the story. "You've got a beautiful voice. If you ever change your mind, we'd love to have you." "Thank you," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But my days of performing are behind me." They exchanged a few more words, and though Emily felt a pull in her heart, she was resolute in her decision. She would help where she could, but she would not step back into the limelight. It was a chapter of her life she had closed. That afternoon, as Emily returned to the front desk, she didn't think much about their conversation. She was busy sorting through paperwork when Mr. Thompson came rushing in, his face flushed with excitement. "I need a favor," he said, barely pausing to catch his breath. "One of the soloists for the upcoming concert has fallen ill, and I'm in a bind. I know this is a big ask, but I need someone to step in at the last minute. I need a strong voice to sing an aria from the magic flute. It's the Queen of the Night's aria, and it's challenging." Emily's heart sank at the mention of that aria. The Queen of the Night's aria was one of the most demanding pieces in the opera world. Only the most trained and experienced singers could do it justice. She hadn't sung opera in years, and certainly not a piece this complex. The mere thought of performing it in front of an audience made her stomach churn. Yet Mr. Thompson's voice was full of desperation. "I can't find anyone else, and the concert's in 2 days. I've heard you sing before, and I believe you're more than capable of handling it," he continued, his voice almost pleading. Emily felt a wave of panic. She wanted to say no. She wanted to walk away, to avoid putting herself back into a world she had left behind. But as she looked into Mr. Thompson's eyes, she saw his genuine concern. He wasn't asking for a star. He was asking for someone to step in and help. And though Emily hated to admit it, she knew she couldn't turn him down. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson's face lit up with relief. "You won't regret this, Emily. I'll make sure you have everything you need. Just come to the rehearsal tomorrow, and we'll get started." That evening, as Emily sat in her small apartment, she couldn't shake the nerves that had settled in her stomach. She hadn't sung professionally in so long. Her voice was rusty, her confidence shaken. Yet deep down she knew she had to try. For herself and for Mr. Thompson, who had put his trust in her when he didn't even know the full extent of her abilities. The next day, she stood in front of the grand piano in the music hall, the familiar setting bringing back memories she had long buried. Mr. Thompson was at the piano, ready to accompany her, but there was a quiet excitement in his eyes. He had no idea what he was about to hear. "Whenever you're ready," he said, his voice full of anticipation. Emily took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment. She let the music fill her mind, and then she began. The first note was hesitant, but as the aria progressed, her voice grew stronger. Each note was precise, each phrase powerful and beautiful. Her training, her years of practice, everything she had learned came rushing back, and suddenly she was no longer the receptionist of Clearwater High. She was an opera singer, reclaiming her place on the stage. Mr. Thompson sat in stunned silence as Emily soared through the aria, her voice breathtakingly clear and controlled. He could hardly believe his ears. She was incredible, better than anyone he could have hoped for. And then it clicked. This was no ordinary woman. Emily was not just a good singer. She was a star, one who had stepped out of the shadows and back into the light, and he was witnessing it firsthand. Emily's heart raced as Mr. Thompson's words echoed in her mind. The Queen of the Night aria. She hadn't performed that in years, and even thinking about it made her palms sweat. It wasn't just a difficult piece. It was one of the most challenging arias in all of opera. The soaring high notes, the rapid coloratura passages, the dramatic emotion required. It was a test of not just technical skill, but of an artist's ability to captivate an audience. As Mr. Thompson spoke with urgency, Emily found herself caught between two worlds. One world was the quiet, humble life she had created for herself in Clearwater, far removed from the spotlight of her past. The other world was the stage, the world she had walked away from. She had spent years building a wall around herself, hiding from the pressures of the opera world. But now, here she was, being asked to step back into it. "I know it's a lot to ask," Mr. Thompson continued, his voice full of sincerity. "But you're the only one I can turn to. Megan's illness has left us in a tight spot. The concert is in just a few days, and I can't risk letting the choir down." Emily felt the weight of his plea, but it was her own inner turmoil that she struggled with the most. The mere thought of singing again, of standing in front of an audience, brought back memories of standing under the spotlight in grand opera houses across the world. The applause, the accolades, the endless rehearsals. It all seemed so far away, like a dream. And yet the music still called to her. She could hear the notes of the aria in her mind, and despite the rustiness of her voice, a part of her still felt the fire of the performer she once was. "Emily, I believe in you," Mr. Thompson added, breaking through her inner conflict. "You've got the voice. You've got the talent. I've seen it. Please, just give it a shot. You might surprise yourself." She looked at him, seeing the earnestness in his eyes. He wasn't just looking for someone to fill a spot in the program. He was looking for a star, and he thought she had it in her. It wasn't just the opportunity that moved Emily. It was his faith in her, the belief he had in her potential. "All right," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. I'm warning you, I haven't sung in years." Mr. Thompson's face lit up with gratitude, but Emily's mind was already racing. She hadn't sung in front of an audience in so long, and performing The Queen of the Night, a piece that required flawless technique and dramatic intensity, was a challenge she wasn't sure she was ready for. That night, Emily stood in front of her mirror, testing her voice in the quiet of her room. She sang a few simple scales, wincing at the unfamiliar feeling in her throat. It had been too long. She hadn't felt the familiar stretch of her vocal cords in years. Her voice sounded weaker than it used to, more fragile. The high notes, once effortless, now felt distant. She closed her eyes, trying to recall the old familiar strength in her voice. But then, as if by instinct, her body fell into the rhythm of the music. Her breath deepened, her chest expanded, and the melody came flooding back to her. She hit the first few high notes, hesitant at first, but then with more confidence. She remembered the power in her voice, the way it could fill a room. It wasn't perfect, but it was still there. The next day, Emily arrived at the music hall early. The space felt unfamiliar to her now, almost intimidating. She hadn't stood on that stage in years, and yet the memories of performing in front of hundreds of people came rushing back. The lights, the tension in the air, the weight of the audience's gaze, it all hit her at once. Mr. Thompson was already at the piano, his fingers lightly tapping on the keys as he waited for her. "Ready?" he asked, his voice cheerful, though Emily could sense the underlying nerves in his tone. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The first few notes of the piano echoed in the space, and Emily began to sing. At first her voice was tentative, unsure. She felt the old nerves rising within her, but she forced them back. She pushed through the discomfort and let her voice rise, higher and higher, as the music demanded. With each note, she found more of the confidence she had once had. By the time she reached the difficult passage, the rapid runs in the aria, her voice began to gain strength. She was surprised by how much of her former self was still there. It wasn't perfect, but it was raw, it was powerful, and it was real. She felt the passion of the character, the Queen of the Night, coursing through her as she sang, her voice soaring through the hall. The aria, which once felt like a daunting obstacle, now felt like an old friend she was reconnecting with. Mr. Thompson, sitting at the piano, watched in awe. He had never imagined that Emily, the woman who had barely acknowledged her own talent, could be this good. He could see it now. She was an artist, a true singer. And as he watched her perform, he realized that sometimes the most extraordinary talents were hidden in plain sight. As the first notes of the piano filled the air, Emily felt the familiar flutter of nerves deep in her stomach. The vast music hall, with its tall ceilings and empty rows of seats, seemed to amplify her anxiety. It had been years since she had sung in a space like this, with all its acoustics and vastness. The stage lights hadn't shone on her in so long. The pressure of performing again felt almost too much to bear. But as her breath deepened and her feet settled into place, something inside her shifted. It was as if the music was calling her back, whispering memories of the operatic stages she had once graced. The years of formal training, the countless rehearsals, and the performances in grand opera houses of Europe, all of it began to resurface in an instant. She opened her mouth to sing, and what came out surprised even her. A rich, powerful, and crystal-clear soprano voice echoed through the room, filling every corner of the hall. It was as if her voice had been waiting for this moment all along, ready to break free. The years of silence had done nothing to dull the strength and beauty of her tone. Mr. Thompson sat at the piano, his hands frozen on the keys. He had heard many students perform before, but nothing like this. Emily's voice was like nothing he had ever imagined. It wasn't just beautiful, it was commanding. The sound filled the space with such power that it seemed to vibrate through his bones. He had known she could sing, but this was something extraordinary. "Emily," Mr. Thompson whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "I had no idea." Her voice continued to soar, effortlessly hitting the high notes of the aria, the ones that many seasoned opera singers struggle with. Her coloratura runs, those rapid-fire sequences of notes, were crisp and flawless. She navigated them with ease, each passage seeming more effortless than the last. The voice that filled the room wasn't just technically perfect. It was filled with emotion, with the depth of the character of the Queen of the Night. It was a voice that told a story, that captured the audience in its grip. As she reached the climactic point of the aria, Emily's voice soared into the stratosphere, higher and higher, as if reaching for the stars. She held the high notes with incredible control, her voice vibrating with emotion and power. When she finally finished, the last note hanging in the air, she took a deep breath and opened her eyes. Mr. Thompson was staring at her, his mouth slightly agape. His fingers hovered above the keys, unsure whether to continue playing or to simply take in the magic of what had just unfolded. He had known she was talented, but this was beyond anything he could have expected. He had always prided himself on recognizing talent, but Emily's performance was something else entirely. He could tell, in that moment, that she wasn't just a talented amateur, she was a star. I didn't know," Mr. Thompson stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. You're incredible." Emily, for the first time in years, allowed herself to smile. She could see the shock and admiration in his eyes, but there was something else too, a deep, quiet understanding. She had always hidden her abilities, and now, for the first time in a long while, she could feel the wall she had built around herself beginning to crumble. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but confident. "But it's been a long time since I've sung like that. I didn't know if I still had it in me." Mr. Thompson was still in awe, but he shook his head. "You've got it, Emily. You've got it all. I had no idea you were, well, this good. You're not just any singer. You're an opera singer. You belong on a stage, performing for audiences who need to hear you." For a moment, Emily didn't know how to respond. She had walked away from that life for a reason. The pressure, the constant need for perfection, the long rehearsals and endless performances, it had all become too much. She had left the opera world behind, hidden herself away from the limelight. But standing there, in the midst of the familiar music hall, hearing Mr. Thompson's words, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope, a possibility. "We'll keep practicing," Mr. Thompson continued, eager to keep the momentum going. "We can work on the piece until it's perfect. I know it's a lot to ask, but I think you could perform this like a professional. I believe in you, Emily." His words had an impact on her that she couldn't ignore. Here was this man, a teacher with no idea of her past, looking at her as if she were a star. He wasn't asking her to return to the opera world. He was simply asking her to sing, to let her voice be heard. And maybe, just maybe, that was all she needed to hear. As they continued to rehearse, Emily began to feel more and more at home in the music. Her voice, once timid and hidden, began to shine through with more confidence and strength. She was no longer just helping out. She was rediscovering the part of herself that had been buried for so long. The more she sang, the more Mr. Thompson realized that Emily wasn't just any singer. She was a true operatic talent, a once-in-a-lifetime voice that could captivate audiences, that could bring the finest operatic arias to life. But the most astounding thing was that Emily hadn't needed the stage or the accolades to prove her worth. She had just needed the right moment, the right encouragement to remind her of who she really was. And now, as they continued to rehearse, Mr. Thompson could see it clearly. Emily wasn't just going to perform the aria, she was going to make it her own. The Queen of the Night wasn't just a character in an opera anymore. She was Emily, rediscovered, revived, and ready to take the world by storm. The night of the concert arrived, and the air in the school auditorium was thick with anticipation. Parents, teachers, and students filled the seats, eagerly chatting about the upcoming performance. The atmosphere was electric, charged with excitement. It wasn't every day that the high school hosted such a grand event, an evening showcasing the talents of the students, with a special focus on operatic pieces. The night had been meticulously planned, but all eyes were on the final performance, the one that would bring the house down, a solo aria from the Magic Flute, a piece that was as famous for its difficulty as it was for its beauty. Mr. Thompson stood backstage, pacing nervously. His mind raced as he adjusted his tie and checked his watch. He had been waiting for this moment for weeks. He had no idea what to expect from Emily. In the rehearsals, her voice had been nothing short of breathtaking, but performing in front of an audience was a different challenge altogether. He couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had asked her to step in at the last minute, and now all he could do was hope her talent would shine through when it mattered most. He looked out at the audience, who were still buzzing with excitement, unaware of the incredible surprise that awaited them. Emily, the quiet receptionist who had once seemed so distant, was about to step onto the stage, not just as a replacement, but as a woman reclaiming her past, rediscovering the voice that had once made her an opera star. But Mr. Thompson had no idea that the woman standing behind the curtain was an artist of the highest caliber, one whose voice could leave an indelible mark on anyone who heard it. Backstage, Emily stood, taking deep breaths as the moments ticked down to her performance. The nerves that had crept in during the rehearsal earlier that day were now pressing against her chest, making her feel like she couldn't breathe. She hadn't sung in front of an audience in years, and now she was about to face a room full of people who expected perfection. Her palms were sweating and her throat felt dry, but she reminded herself of the promise she had made to Mr. Thompson and to herself. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. With a final breath, she stepped into the spotlight. The instant Emily walked onto the stage, the auditorium fell silent. The audience was captivated by her presence, the quiet woman who had been a mystery to them all. Her tall, graceful figure was framed by the bright lights, her expression focused yet serene. She walked confidently to the center of the stage, the echo of her footsteps resonating in the hushed room. The piano accompaniment began softly, and the familiar notes of the Queen of the Night aria filled the space. And then Emily opened her mouth. A wave of sound poured from her, filling the auditorium with a richness and clarity that took everyone by surprise. It was as if she had effortlessly summoned the power of her voice from deep within her, as if the years of silence had only sharpened her ability to sing. The sound was pure, powerful, and breathtaking. Every note was crystal clear, resonating through the hall, vibrating with emotion. As the music swelled and the aria became more intense, Emily's voice followed suit. She soared through the high passages with ease. Her coloratura runs impeccable, each note articulated with precision. The complexity of the piece, which had once seemed so daunting to her, now felt like second nature. She moved with the music, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm as she delivered each line with dramatic flair. The aria was not just a technical feat, it was a story. She wasn't just singing the Queen of the Night, she became the Queen of the Night, her voice imbued with the character's fury, pain, and power. The audience was mesmerized. They were silent at first, almost in disbelief at the sheer beauty of what they were hearing. As Emily's voice rang out, perfectly controlled and effortlessly powerful, the crowd slowly began to realize that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A woman they had never noticed before, standing in front of them now, was performing with the grace, precision, and brilliance of an opera star. They had no idea that this was no mere high school performance. What they were experiencing was a rare glimpse of true, untapped talent, an artist in full bloom. From backstage, Mr. Thompson couldn't believe his eyes and ears. He'd expected a strong performance, yes, but nothing like this. His heart raced as he watched Emily on stage, the power of her voice vibrating through his entire body. This wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation. The woman who had once been the quiet receptionist, who had shied away from the limelight, was now commanding the stage with the skill and passion of a world-class opera singer. As Emily's voice soared to its final crescendo, the audience was on the edge of their seats, breathless. When the last note was struck, she held it with incredible control before letting it gently fade. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment it felt as though time had stopped, as though everyone in the room was holding their breath in awe of what they had just witnessed. And then the applause erupted. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was an outpouring of admiration, of astonishment. The audience was on their feet, cheering, clapping, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Emily stood at the center of the stage, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She took a moment to absorb the standing ovation, to feel the warmth of the applause. For the first time in years, she felt alive in a way that was unfamiliar but exhilarating. Backstage, Mr. Thompson was grinning from ear to ear. He had no idea that he had just witnessed the rebirth of a star. He hadn't known the full extent of Emily's talent, but now, standing in the shadows, he saw truth. Emily wasn't just a woman who had helped him out in a pinch. She was a world-class soprano, a force of nature who had rediscovered herself in the most unexpected of places. As the curtain fell, Emily took her final bow, her heart soaring as high as the note she had just sung. The world, for a moment, had seen her for who she truly was. And there, in the applause and cheers of the audience, she knew that she had not just performed a song. She had found her voice again, and this time, she was never going to let it go. The auditorium was still buzzing with excitement as the audience's cheers filled the air. Emily stood in the center of the stage, her body still humming with the adrenaline of the performance. She had just given a performance that no one, least of all herself, had expected. The applause seemed to go on forever, and for a moment she allowed herself to soak it all in. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, and completely unexpected. The feeling of being seen, of being appreciated for the artistry she had hidden for so long, was more than she could have ever imagined. As the applause continued, Emily felt the weight of the moment settle around her. She could feel the warmth of the audience's admiration, their energy feeding into her own. She had stepped back onto the stage after years of self-imposed exile, and it felt like coming home. But as much as the spotlight was intoxicating, Emily knew that it wasn't about the fame, the applause, or the recognition. It was about the music. It was about rediscovering the passion she had buried under the weight of life's responsibilities. Tonight had reminded her why she had once loved singing, the pure joy of making music, of sharing that part of herself with the world. But it wasn't just the audience that had been affected by her performance. Mr. Thompson was the first to rush onto the stage, his face alight with excitement and disbelief. His eyes were wide with admiration, and a grin stretched across his face as he approached Emily, still surrounded by the thunderous applause. "Emily, you're incredible!" he exclaimed, his voice full of wonder. "I can't believe it. Why didn't you tell me? You're not just a singer, you're an opera star. You were magnificent." Emily looked at him, her smile small but filled with knowing warmth. She had heard those words from many people before, critics, fans, colleagues. But hearing them now, from him, a teacher who had never known her past, felt different. It wasn't about the accolades anymore. It was about being seen for who she truly was, not just a quiet woman behind the desk, but a talented artist who had hidden her gifts away. "I suppose I didn't want to be seen as that," Emily replied softly, her voice tinged with a bittersweet tone. "I left that life behind, for reasons that were my own. But tonight reminded me of why I loved it, why I fell in love with singing in the first place." Mr. Thompson, still in awe, took a step back as he absorbed her words. He had known Emily for months, but he had never imagined that this quiet, humble woman had been hiding such immense talent. He had asked her to sing for the concert because of a simple need, not knowing that he had stumbled upon a hidden gem. Now, as he looked at her, he realized that sometimes the most extraordinary talents are hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be discovered. "I'm glad you did it," Mr. Thompson said earnestly, his voice full of admiration. "I honestly didn't know what to expect, but you were amazing. I've taught a lot of students, but none like you. You're an opera star, Emily. I had no idea what I was missing." Emily's eyes softened as she met his gaze. "It wasn't about being a star, Mr. Thompson," she said quietly. "It was about finding my way back to what I love, and I owe that to you for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself." Mr. Thompson nodded, his heart swelling with pride for the woman standing before him. He had known there was something special about Emily the first time they had met. He hadn't known the depth of her talents, but he had always believed in her potential. Tonight, she had proved him right in ways he couldn't have imagined. As they stood there, the final echoes of applause still ringing in the air, Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had rediscovered a part of herself she had long buried, a part she had thought was lost forever. The world had seen her for who she was that night, not just a woman, but an artist, a singer with a voice that could move people to tears. And for Mr. Thompson, the lesson was clear. Sometimes the most extraordinary talents don't come with fanfare or expectations. They often hide in the quietest of places, waiting for the right person to see them, to recognize them for what they truly are. He had always prided himself on pushing his students to do their best, but Emily had taught him something that night. She had shown him that talent isn't always obvious at first glance. Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper, to look beyond the surface to discover the greatness beneath. The night ended with a standing ovation, but Emily knew that the applause wasn't just for the performance. It was for the journey she had taken, for the courage it had taken to step back into the spotlight. And as the curtain fell and the lights dimmed, Emily realized that she had finally come full circle. She wasn't just a quiet woman behind the desk anymore. She was an opera star, rediscovered in the most unexpected of places. And as for Mr. Thompson, he would never forget the lesson he had learned that night. Sometimes it takes a leap of faith to uncover greatness, and the most extraordinary talents often come in the most unexpected packages.